statement that dominates the future soldier's experience. From the first day, cadets' expectations of leaders and of themselves are shaped by the visceral experience of being physically surrounded by reminders of past leaders. Cadets clad in traditional gray move among icons of those who once wore the same uniform. I lived in Pershing Barracks, named for the officer who led America's expeditionary force to France in World War I. When I walked to attend class in Thayer Hall, named for the officer who set the course of West Point in its early years, I passed a bronze George Patton, the aggressive World War II commander. Portraits of famous officers gazed down on every meal, never letting us forget that West Point's raison d'etre was to mold us into leaders. At the same time, we were reminded it was not about us. We were being developed to serve the larger purpose of the nation by extending West Point's long gray line, the term used to describe West Point's alumni who kept unbroken commitments to the academy and the nation's ideals. We were taught the beliefs and behaviors of great leaders, not by academics, but largely by young officers recently off the battlefields of Southeast Asia. We inhaled their stories of combat and envied their accomplishments. We admired their integrity, courage, and sense of duty, and we learned to look, walk, and talk in the way they taught us. If we did so, we were told and believed, we might not be famous leaders, but we would serve well. And we suspected, but never openly speculated, that some of us would make the history future cadets would study. Soon after graduation, it was my turn to lead, first as a platoon leader, an infantry lieutenant responsible for 20 1970s American paratroopers. Although the post-Vietnam Army was a troubled institution, the majority of soldiers, like generations before them, did their jobs with stoic patience. And like leaders of generations before me, I progressed through the ranks to captain, commanding 150 men, battalion, commanding 600, and regiment, about 2,200, before becoming a general officer. At that point, my experience took me into territory I'd not studied at West Point. In the post-9/11 environments of Iraq and Afghanistan, I spent almost 5 years commanding the Joint Special Operations Command, a one-of-a-kind task force composed of the nation's most elite forces. As an over 50-year-old product of earlier-era leadership models, I was challenged by this new environment. I found command of a 21st-century technology-enabled battlefield required not just traditional skills, but also intuitive adaptations. Throughout my years in military leadership, my reading continued. I had a strong preference for history, frequently reading biographies like those of George Washington and George Marshall, and the memoirs of Ulysses Grant. Novels periodically crept onto my nightstand, although typically they were historically and often militarily grounded. I remember being fascinated by The Killer Angels, in which author Michael Shara made me feel like a confidant of the well-known leaders of the Battle of Gettysburg. While I enjoyed the study of history and leaders, as I matured, the concepts of leadership that I had willingly accepted increasingly contrasted with what I read and much of what I experienced. The patrician warrior Robert E. Lee lost to nondescript Sam Grant. The inspiring ideas of Thomas Jefferson stood in contrast to his position as a slaveholder. And emerging insights about Allied successes in breaking Axis codes revealed that victories, once attributed to superior generalship, were actually the result of a combination of other factors. I found that leaders who exhibited all the right traits often fell short, while others who possessed none of the characteristics of traditional leadership succeeded. The things we sought and celebrated in leaders had confusingly little linkage to outcomes. The study of leadership increasingly seemed to be a study of myth, with a significant gap between how we speak of it and how it is experienced. In the fall of 2010, this mythology of leadership became more personal. Partnered with Sam Ayers, a recent Yale graduate who would later enlist in the Army and serve as a sergeant in the 75th Ranger Regiment, I undertook the task of writing my memoir. Having not kept records or a journal to avoid retaining classified information, I had to begin by creating a decades-long timeline of my life.